Good evening. Continuing in the book of Leviticus, we're up to this week's Torah portion, which is called Emor. And last week, we finished two Torah portions that we were supposed to have read in the synagogue last week. Acharei Mot, which is after the death of Aaron's two sons, as they were inaugurating the tabernacle in the wilderness, as the Jewish people had come out of Egypt. And then that was followed up with this parsha called Kedoshim, where we learn about many of the ways in which we can elevate ourselves. We can become holy by connecting ourselves to God through these specific guidelines that God tells us, right? So not gossiping, and by having correct judgments, by being truthful, by being honest, by etc. etc. We talked about that last week. So now I'm going to continue in the book of Leviticus, and this week's Torah portion is called Parshat Emor. And the first sentence of this week's Torah portion says, Hashem said to Moses, say to the Kohanim are the priests, the sons of Aaron, and tell them. And then we learn a lot about the beginning of this week's Torah portion. We learn a lot about the rules of the priests in the tabernacle and the work they're going to do, which is a little bit repetitive from what we learned before, but it distinguishes the Kohanim, the priests, from the rest of the Jewish people and how they are supposed to act and what they're supposed to do. And we learn about that in this week's Torah portion. So one of the things that is brought out from the commentators as this language that says that God says to Moses, say to the Kohanim and the sons of Aaron, repeats that you say to the Aaron and to his sons. And two things about the language of this particular sentence. One is that the word emor, amar, to say, is a language that speaks of kindness, of love, of God saying to the priest, you're the people who I am giving the job, the mandate to be the link. When you bless the people, you're going to bless the people with the words that I tell you to use, and you'll be the conduit for the love and the flow of blessing into the world when you bless the Jewish people. And so this language of emor, this language of love, is a really lovely way in which we understand God speaks to Moses to tell Aaron and to his sons. And from this we learn out, this is the source, one of the sources, for the importance of us as a Jewish people, teaching the next generation, teaching our children. So yes, we can teach ourselves, and yes, we can learn something, but it's only as good as you can use it unless you share it. And this week's Torah portion, where it mentions that not only is Moses supposed to speak to Aaron, but he's also supposed to speak to the sons of Aaron. The idea being that we're going to transmit this knowledge, we're going to transmit this wisdom. This wisdom shouldn't stay with Aaron. It should be continually be transmitted. And we all just came out of Passover. And right there, we learn everything. We learn so much about how important it is to tell our children, how important it is to teach our children. Not sidebar comment, not only do we teach our children, we also teach ourselves. And we not only teach other people, and we not only teach the next generation who should continue the legacy and continue the wisdom and continue the message that God wants us to put into the world, but we also have to teach it to ourselves. So on the one hand, yes, we're learning and we're growing and we're changing and we're moving as an individual, but we're also given the mandate to then spread that knowledge out, and to spread it to the next generation, and to spread it to people in our midst, to speak about it, to talk about it, to not just hold it inside, and use the speech of emor, use the speech of amar, use the speech of love and connection, and not a speech of harshness and direction, but to be one of more loving. So that's how we learn out, just from that one first sentence of this week's Torah portion, the need to spread the knowledge that we have and to continue to speak it out, but to speak it out kindly and gently and lovingly, and also to speak it out to the next generation. So it teaches us, when we speak it out, we learn ourselves and we also teach the next generation and teach other people. So that's woven in here. This week's Torah portion, as I mentioned, speaks about the priests, and we have a lot we're going to learn about the priests and what they can do and what they can't do, and what makes them special. So they're considered kadosh, they're considered extra holy, so to speak, because the work that they do is inside the tabernacle, inside the temple in Jerusalem, where the presence, the Shekhinah, the divine presence rests. So there's a sort of an extra separateness that the priestly tribe has, because their work is directly in contact with God in the temple. So there's a different role that they play. And it's very interesting because today we know who are descended from Aaron, the high priest. The first Kohen was Aaron. And we know who the descendants of Cohen are. Even till today, we know who those people are. And in America, outside of Israel, the Kohanim, the priestly tribe, the people who are Kohen, they get the first aliyah in synagogues. They get called up to the Torah first. And on holidays and in Israel, every single day, they go up onto the bima, they go up in the synagogue, and they bless the people in the congregation, and they bless them with the priestly blessing of peace and divine grace shining upon us, and they are the conduit for love and peace and connection and bringing blessing into the world and bringing it into the Jewish people. So they have to be on a different level. They have to think about that. They have to somehow embody the role that they've been given. This is the job you have. Remember where we talked last week about the Parsha. It's called Achrei Mot, after the death of Aaron's two sons. So Aaron was inaugurating the temple. He was doing the service, and then he learns that his two sons die as they bring in this foreign fire that they would not ask to bring, and they die. And Aaron is told, don't mourn. You have to keep doing your job. You have to keep bringing divine presence down into the world. You have to keep doing the avoda. You have to keep bringing the sacrifices. You have to keep doing this. Yes, your sons died, but your job right now, the job that you were mandated with, you were charged with, was to do this work, was to bring heaven down to earth. Bring heaven down to earth. So you can't leave what you're doing. You have to stay focused. And it's a very hard for us to understand that. How to compartmentalize. All right, there's this emotional response to the death of my sons. Putting myself in Aaron's place, death of my two sons, and I also have this work to do, which is so important. Like, it's more important perhaps than mourning right now, because this is what I have to do, and it has to happen now, and that's what I'm doing. So there's a lesson there, I think, in focusing. Like, the focus right now is to do this, right, and not to get caught up in the emotion and the emotional response, and what happened to his two sons is beyond anybody's ability to understand, how to endure the death of two children at once in this very joyous time. And I have to do this work. I have to continue to bring heaven down onto earth. And so the role of the Kohen, the role of the priest, is to connect heaven and earth, God to the people, God to earth. So one of the things that we learn in this week's Torah portion that the Kohen cannot do is come into contact with death. So it says here, each of you shall not contaminate himself to a dead person among his people, except for the relative who is closest to him, his mother, his father, his son, his daughter, and to his brother, his virgin sister who is close to him, who has not been wed to a man, to her shall he contaminate himself. So what we're learning is that the Kohen should not come in contact with death. And how we practice that today is that a Kohen cannot go into a cemetery. And then there's other applications to that, like if there's a Kohen who's training to be a doctor, and what that looks like in a hospital, etc., or what it looks like to get on an aeroplane where there were dead people who were being flown to another country. Like, there's other things that the Kohen has to take into account that we don't even think about. But the idea, I want to bring out the idea of why it is that a Kohen can't come into contact with death is because death, if you go back to the Adam and Eve story, Adam and Eve ate from that tree of knowledge of good and evil, and when they ate from that tree and they took in that knowledge, so to speak, and they took in a certain energy, such that death was the result. The consequence of what they did is that there would be death. There would be an uncoupling of the soul, the divine heavenly soul that is all inside of us, that we are vessels for this heavenly soul, that is our neshama, that's our soul, and we're also a physical body. And death is an uncoupling of that body and soul. And the soul continues to live. The soul doesn't die. Like we say death, but it really isn't the end. The soul continues to live. So, but it's separated from the body, right? So there's a vacuum, there's a void, there's something we call tame, something we call a spiritual energy, that when a person comes into contact with that spiritual energy, tame, then they can't go into the temple. So the Kohen can't come in contact with death. Death is an uncoupling of divine energy our soul from our physical body. It's an uncoupling of heaven and earth. It's an uncoupling of heaven and earth. And the role of the Kohen is to bring heaven and earth together. So they can't come into contact with something that's caused a disconnection between that heaven and earth, between that physical and spiritual. They have to be the ones who will bring it all together, all together, all together. So they enter into a state of tameh, should they come in. We all do come into contact with tameh, but if the Kohen is charged with the job of being the one to connect it and the one to be in the temple and the one to be bringing earth, heavenly energy down, godly energy down, then he can't come in contact with death. The other well-known in those circles for Kohanim thing that's mentioned in this week's Torah portion is that a Kohen cannot marry a divorced woman, which is an interesting thing. And one of the things I learned about that I think is interesting to pull out is that when a couple come together, we have an understanding that there's holiness there. There's a divine presence that rests between the couple when they get married, and when they get divorced, that heavenly presence leaves. There's something that's created between in the friction and in the discord that happens between the couple, that the heavenly energy that connected them leaves, and you're left with two individual entities that go off, and there's certain different directions, and maybe there's animosity and maybe there isn't, but the point is that the heavenly part of that union has separated. So again, it's this idea of pulling the heaven out of the earth, is pulling the spiritual out of the physical, and when that happens, it leaves a vacuum, and that vacuum is on some level a negative vacuum, and that's not something that the Kohen can come in touch with, because his whole his whole purpose is to bring it all together and to bring it to a place of love and peace and connection and unity of heaven and earth. So when it's separate, then there's a disunity. The Kohen can't be there and can't go there. So I thought that was an interesting way to look at it. So that's just what I wanted to say about that. The Kohen is charged with bringing connection, bringing divine energy down, bringing life and bringing peace. And he can't be charged with the job of separation, of the separateness caused by divorce, the separateness caused by death. So he has to see the completeness with God. That's his job, is to bring completeness and togetherness. So death and divorce and all things that bring tameh into the world are things he has to stay away from. Okay, so this is the story of the Kohen, and also, we understand and we learn in this week's Torah portion that if the sacrifice, if the offering that the Kohen is bringing in on the altar is blemished in any way, then that offering is disqualified. We can't use that offering. We also learn that if the Kohen has a blemish, he also can't be serve in the holy temple, which is interesting because, on some level, some of these blemishes, some of the things that would disqualify this Kohen from being able to serve in the temple are things that are outside of his control. Maybe he's born with a limp, so he can't be serving in the temple, which is also interesting. Like, he has to accept that. There has to be a level of acceptance that God is in control. And if this Kohen with this blemish, so to speak, disqualifies him from serving in the temple, then he has to go with that. He has to understand that. He has to accept that. He can't rail against that and do it anyway. That's the way it's set up, and he has to not serve in the temple. And here's what I want to bring in. On many times in our Jewish tradition, we have distinctions between people. We have distinctions between time. We have distinctions between places. There's this idea of unity and everything should come together and be unified, and there's also diversity and there's also difference. And if you think about that, here the Kohen, the priestly nation, are different from the rest of the Jewish people. The Jewish people are different than the rest of the humanity. There's differences. There's a different role that Jewish people play. There's a different role that the Kohanim play. There's a different role that non-Jewish people play. That's kind of built into our system of understanding how God has set up the world. We also understand there's a difference between night and day. There's a difference between spirituality and physicality. There's a difference between a weekday and a Shabbat. There's a difference between Shabbat and the holidays, the holy days, the holidays. There's a difference between that. And that's, again, what we learn about in this week's Torah portion. We learn about the holidays. It's again another whole chapter which delineates all the Jewish holidays that are to be celebrated, and we go through and we learn about those holidays, and we read it on every holiday that comes up. We read it in the synagogue. We read about the holidays. So I'm going to go through very quickly some of the holidays. Before I do that, I want to point out this idea of separation, this idea of distinctiveness and difference, and again, I don't want it to be better or worse, different, right? Yes, we want unity, and yes, we want everything to recognize the oneness of the world, and there's nothing other than God, and yes, 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 and different people, like men are different than women, and older people are different than younger people, and children are different than parents, and we have many different ways, and very holy people and people who are very learned in Torah have a different status in our society than people who are still learning and coming up, so people who are very humble have a different energy they put into the world. So we do recognize differences and distinctiveness and separations between people, but that the ideal is unity. The ideal is love and connection, but not by making everything the same. We're saying, yes, there's differences. The difference between day and night. There's difference between Shabbat and the weekdays. And again, in this week's Torah portion, we're going to go through. But the first mitzvah that was given to the Jewish people when they came out of Egypt, the first mitzvah that was given to them was to observe and to recognize the new moon, was to declare the new moon. This was God saying, you people get to declare when the moon is new. And based on that comes all the holidays. When the holidays fall out is on some level something that we are charged with deciding when is that new moon, and therefore when are the holidays. And in this week's Torah portion, we learn about on this day is this holiday, on this day is this holiday, but the month we declare the month by looking at the moon. So we have some agency over time. We have some involvement with time. The Shabbat, which comes around every 7 days, is God-given, right? So we've learnt in Genesis how God created the world, and we went through 6 days of creation, 6 days of a chol, of weekday, and then we have this Shabbat day, the separate day. It's a holy day. It's a day where we stop creating, where we say God creates the world, and we take a step back and we reevaluate and we reconvene and we count our blessings and we think about who we are, and we think about perhaps more spiritual things and what God means to us, and we have a relationship with Shabbat that is different than the other days. We have a relationship with God on Shabbat that's different than the other days. It's a time to be with God. Similarly, all the Jewish holidays are those days to be with God. They're a moadim. They're meeting times. They're times where we separate off from our weekday jobs, work, activities, creations, all the things that we do during the week, and we declare these days different. But God tells us what the energy of that time is. So for a Jew, we have a lot of different ways of calculating time, but on some level, I've heard this, and I like this idea that time could seem to be linear, like we started here and we're going through time and we keep going and we're on a line. Or it could be like we come around every year. We come around to the same. Okay, so now it's May, whatever it is, May 5th. So it's coming around every day, every year. It's May 5th. Fine. But that's circular, and one's linear and one's circular. And I heard, and I like this, I think it's Kabbalistic, that Jewish time is like, what was the word, if I can find it? I really liked it. It's called an ascending spiral. It's an ascending, like a circular helix, like it goes around, but it's going up at the same time. So yes, it's going around, and yes, we come around to the same time every year, but we're also going up, meaning that we're progressing, hopefully, that we're getting closer, like we're bringing the world up, like there's a movement towards something, but it's also circular. We're coming around. What are we coming around to? We're coming around to a certain energy. There's a certain energy that exists in the world, because this is the way God set up the world, that exists in the springtime. It's a different energy in the springtime than in the fall time. Different energy. And we have a little bit of a confusing muddle of things. Let's take the springtime. So we have a holiday, Passover, in the springtime, and it has to be in the springtime. But it might be interesting to think, well, yes, it's a historical event of when the Jews came out of Egypt, and it's a return to the energy that exists in this time of redemption, of being freed, of coming out of something that holds us back, of being able to kind of break out and be redeemed. So that energy that exists in the month of Nisan, which is, we're not in that month anymore, but that energy that exists in the month of Nisan happens every Nisan. And that's why the exodus from Egypt had to happen in Nisan, because the energy of redemption and coming out of a constrained place is greater in this time. And that's why the redemption from Egypt had to happen in the springtime. It had to happen in the month of Nisan. It has to happen that spring is, if you look around in the physical world, I don't know where everybody's living, but where I live in Providence, Rhode Island, you can look around and you see nature bursting out. You see things growing. You see things moving. You see things coming out from the hidden buds. The blossoms are coming out. It's so beautiful, and perhaps there's a way of thinking about, like, take it into a God realm and say what's happening is there's a breaking out in the physical world, there's a breaking out in the spiritual world, there's a breaking out. What am I breaking out from? And where did we come from? We came from Mitzrayim, we came from Egypt, we came from a place of constraint. And we were in such a low place. When the Jewish people were in Egypt, we were in such a low place. We were like at the end mark, the 49th level of impurity. We were way down. We're not doing what we're supposed to do. We were doing some things, but we weren't doing what we were supposed to do. And we lost touch with God, and we didn't know how to redeem ourselves. God pulls us out. He puts us in the desert. And now we're building up. We came from nothing. We were at the bottom. We were like hit rock bottom. And now we're building ourselves back up. And this is a period between Passover and the next holiday coming up with called Shavuot, where the Jewish people receive the Torah on Mount Sinai. But this period from coming out of Egypt until receiving the Torah at Mount Sinai is 49 days, 50 days, but 49 days. 49 levels of impurity that we descended into in Egypt. And now we're going 49 days until we get to Sinai. And are we ready? Are we different? Are we the vessels to receive the divine light? How do we get from there to there? We've worked on ourselves. And so too, in this period now, right now, but we just came out of Passover, we're in between that. We're in that in-between place. Yesterday I think was day 25, of counting the days from the second day of Passover until we get to Shavuot. It's 49 days. Day by day, by day, by day, we're going to work on ourselves. We're trying to work on ourselves. We're trying to be better. We're trying to improve ourselves. We're trying to understand the energies that exist inside of us. We say there are 7 energies. I'm not going to go into all of the different Kabbalistic understandings of the different energies. I think that would be a great class to do. But there are seven energies that we have, and kindness, and I'm not going to go through them all, strictness, etc. And each one manifests itself in each day. So each day we're going to work on and acknowledge and try to focus on one of those 7 energies compared to another one of those 7 energies. So we do that for 49 days, and hopefully by the end of that we're different than we were before, right? So our Jewish tradition, again, built in to our system, are opportunities for us to acknowledge the fact that we can always start anew, that we can always change, that we can always work on ourselves, that we always pray, that we are a work in progress. We are people who continue to birth ourselves as we grow, as we become mature through our lifetimes, and even in our 60s and 70s and 80s, we're still birthing ourselves, we're still growing, we're not done. We don't accept that you're done. We don't accept that you can't change. That's not the Jewish approach to who we are. We have built in these times where we focus on what growth and what, not that we don't do that every day, but that when we talked last week, we talked about forgiveness and how forgiveness is built into the system so that we can wash ourselves clean. On Yom Kippur, we can wash ourselves clean, start again. During the 49 days of counting the Omer, we can work on ourselves. We came from nothing and we're building ourselves up into something. We're going from nothing to something. Now that's reminiscent of what we understand God did. God created nothing, and then out of nothing he created the universe. He created something. So God created the nothing, and then he creates the something. We are given something. We take ourselves, or we experience a rock bottom, a humility, a bottom level, a sense of, I mean, we need that. We need to not fill ourselves up with our own ego. We need to go down onto the bedrock, which we did over Passover when we ate matzah, which is that leavened bread that's down and humble and not puffed up with our own ego. We try to get to that place of, humility, and then we're going to build ourselves up, not to be arrogant by the time we get to Shavuot, but to recognize that we have things to work on, and try to work on them, and ask God to help us, and then get to the place where we're better, we're improved, we're a little bit more along the line than we were before. And so in this week's Torah portion, we are given the commandment to count those 49 days. I'm not sure if I can find it. Here. So Hashem spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when you shall enter the land that I give you, and you reap its harvest, you shall bring an omer, which is an offering. It's a barley offering. Your first harvest to the Kohen." So when you first come into Israel, this is what you're going to do. You're going to bring an omer. And you shall wave the omer before Hashem to gain favor for you. On the morrow of the rest day, the Kohen shall wave it. And you shall count for yourselves from the morrow of the rest day. So after the first day of Passover, so the second day, you're going to start counting. From the morrow of the rest day, it says right here in the Torah, from the day when you bring the omer of the offering, 7 weeks. They shall be complete. Until the morrow of the 7th week, you shall count 50 days, and you shall offer a new meal offering to Hashem. And that 50th day is the holiday of Shavuos. So it told in the Torah, from that day when you bring the Omer offering, when you enter into the land of Israel, and you bring the barley offering. What's the barley offering? The barley offering is an animal offering. It's an animal. I was an animal. I have this animal side of me. I love to eat, and I love to drink, and I love to be engaged in my body. Yes, and I'm a soul, and I want to access my soul. I want to bring my soul out. I want my body to be the horse, and I want my soul to be the rider. I want the soul to lead me. I want to understand what my soul is saying to me, and I want to follow my soul. I want the horse to be led by the rider. I want the horse, i.e. the body, to be led by the soul, i.e. the rider. That's what I wanted to go. So the Omer offering is the barley offering, it's the animal. I want to get rid of the animal side of me, not rid of it. I want to channel it. I want to channel my animal side, because I respect my animal side. I take care of my animal side. I have to look after it. I can't overeat, and I can't overindulge, and I can't eat bad foods, and I have a responsibility to take care of my body. I can't kill myself. I can't put tattoos on my body. We've read some of those things last week. So I have to take care of my body. I have to look after it. It's a mitzvah to take care of yourself, and to look after yourself, and respect yourself, and not speak ill of yourself. And I also want to elevate my spiritual side. So as we go through the 49 days till we get to the 50th day, that's what we're working on. We're working on improving ourselves and working on ourselves. And how do I do that? And so, that's a class for another time, to go through the 7 times 7 till we get to the 50. But in that is this nugget of time, managing time. How do we manage time? How do we think about time? How do we process time and what's our time awareness? And so, as I said, we have the sun cycle. So that takes us 6 days. 7 days is Shabbat. We have 6 days of work, 7 days of Shabbat. And then we have the moon cycle that we're in charge of declaring the Rosh Chodesh, and we're starting a new Chodesh. We're starting new. We get to start again, and we get to decide when the moon is. We're partners in that, and then when the holidays fall out. And there's lots of 7 days, like in the 7th month, which is the month of Tishrei. So Nisan is the first month, is the month we came out of Egypt. The other side, the other end of the if it's circular time spiral, the opposite end of that is the 7th month, which is the month of Tishrei, which is the month that we have Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and the holiday of Sukkot. So Sukkot happens at the other end of the month of the calendar. So we have in the beginning we have spring and Passover, and yes, it's the historical God, the God who brought the Jews out of Egypt, and yes, we're doing that. But we're also acknowledging and really focusing on the fact that there's redemptive energy in the not just in the air, that's too available for us to harness. Like it's greater. There's a greater redemptive energy here for us to hold on to grab, to use, to improve ourselves, to work on ourselves. It's an amazing concept. And when we get to Sukkot, which is the harvest festival, okay, so it's the other side of the calendar. We get to that holiday. What do we do on that holiday? We sit in Sukkot. We sit in these booths. We go outside of our houses. We build a little structure made out of whatever, and it has on the roof. It has leaves and trees and bamboos and whatever you have. But it's not our solid. I'm good. I'm in control. I have my home. I'm good. It's going out into the elements. It's going out if it rains, if it's hot, whatever it is. There's an aspect that we go out into that sukkah and we so to speak live with God. And the idea of the sukkah, Kabbalistically, is it represents the clouds of glory that sustained the Jewish people, that protected the Jewish people when they were wandering in the desert. As we mentioned, the Jewish people come out of Egypt, they get put in the desert, and they wander in the desert for 40 years and 40 years. And that as they're traveling around, they're protected by the clouds, these clouds of glory that represent the protection of God, looking after the Jewish people, getting rid of wild animals and scorpions and things. We're going to learn about that a little bit later, where that breaks down. But that's the cushion that God provides for us. It's almost like I like to think of it as sort of almost like Aladdin on his magic carpet, that we're sort of like we're safe, we're taken care of. God is taking care of us and leading us somewhere, taking us somewhere, like teaching us how to walk on our own. We start off almost like little children, and we're just following God into the desert. The month of Nisan, which we just left behind, that's one before where we are now, is depicted by the zodiac sign of sheep. And we were like sheep. We came out of Egypt and we just followed Moses. We followed Nachshon and Aminadab as he jumped into the Reed Sea, which split. And we followed. There was a sort of a herd, kind of like flock kind of experience that we had. We were like the sheep. That is the zodiac sign for Nisan. Like this is not accidental. This is all fits together. It's crazy stuff. So we come into the desert. And now we're learning how to walk. We're learning how to be independent. We're learning what God wants of us and how to live our lives. And we're learning and we're growing. And this month we're in now, month of ER, this is the month we're in now, is a month depicted zodiac sign of a bull, which is learning how to be independent and stand for itself and become a little bit of a leader and be strong and be and to stand on their own 2 feet. And that's what we also have to do. Yes, there might be times where we're more of a herd and we follow along, and then there's times where we're going to be like the bull, like the ox, and we're going to be strong, and we're going to pull others along, and we're going to be independent, and we're going to have a certain confidence of who we are. And then the next month that we're going to head into, that the month of Shavuot, called Sivan. And the month of Sivan is depicted in the zodiac signs by the twins. Moving into the month of Sivan, which is this month of the twins, the connection, and that's where we're moving into when we get to Mount Sinai and we receive the Torah. That month of connection, that month of Sivan, is where we're joining together, where there's a connection. And how amazing is that the zodiac signs line up. It's all part of the same idea that the energy in the universe is there to be tapped into. So the energy that happened when we came out of Egypt was the energy of the sheep, of the following. We needed that energy. We needed to follow. We couldn't think for ourselves. We had to follow God into the desert. Then when we're in the desert, we're bulls. We're like learning how to be independent. We're learning how to be strong. We're learning how to understand ourselves. And then when we get to Mount Sinai and we're going to join with Hashem and we're going to join with each other, and there's going to be an Ish Echad, Belev Echad, that we're going to be like one people. That's the energy of connection that comes in the month of Sivan, as depicted by the twins. So the zodiac signs represent the mazel, represent the energy that's in the universe that we're tapping into. So when we came out of Egypt, there's a redemptive energy that existed in the month of Nisan, that exists in spring, which is why it's spring, which is why the buds are coming out of their encasements. That's all happening because that's the energy that swirls around at that time. And when we come around to that time again, the following year, we have that energy again. And that's why Passover has to happen in the spring. Not that not that that Passover is in the spring and therefore we celebrate it in the spring. It's the other way around. Spring is the energy that brings about the redemption. Spring is the energy, the redemptive energy is there, and what was able to be tapped into by the confluence of events that's when the Jewish people had to be brought out, because that's when the energy was most intense and most manifest, right? So that's when the redemption had to happen. Not, oh, it happened that Passover's in the spring, so it all has to do with the spring. It's spring energy, redemption energy is why Passover's in the spring, in that season. And if you go back in the Torah, we understand that Abraham, do you remember the story of Abraham where he's sitting in his tent and the three angels come or the three men come and he takes care of them and he serves them matzah? We understand that Abraham, says the Medrash, I think, was celebrating Passover. Like, what is that about? Like, we hadn't come out of Egypt. We had no, Exodus story. It wasn't like, what are you talking about? Like, Abraham's thousands of years before the Exodus story. What does it mean that he's celebrating Passover? It means that the energy of Passover was one that he could tap into. He had the spiritual antenna to be able to tap into that energy, so that when Abraham is sitting in his tent and he's feeding these strangers that come to his home, he's feeding them matzah because he understood that that was the energy of that time. Okay, so when we celebrate those holidays, we do ourselves a disservice if we only use them as ways to remember the past. If it's only about, oh, let's talk about what happened to the Jewish people when they came out of Egypt, that's half of it. The story and the historical memory of it and what we're supposed to teach our children, getting back to the whole idea of teaching our children, all of that is important, is very important. But the other piece of it is that energy, we have to be mindful that energy is there for us. Now, like, how do I make this energy meaningful for me now today? How do I use it to change me, to project me forward, to make me into a human being, doing, moving, growing, right? We are not angels. Angels apparently have, I don't really know what this means, but they don't move. They have like a solid leg, which is why when we pray the silent prayer in the synagogue, we stand and we don't move and our legs are together because we want to be like an angel who's like only doing the will of God. But the point is that we have legs that move. We move. We're people who are engaged in a process, in a birth, in creating ourselves. Angels are not. They're just there to do the messengers, to be whatever we'll talk about that. They have their role is set for them and they do their role. That's what they do. So it's really interesting then to think about how that plays out for us. Like, we have to take the energy of the moment and use it and harness it and it's there for us. God's saying it's here. Like, yes, you can remember the story, but the story, number one, yes, know where you came from. And that's important to know that you belong to these people who came out from Egypt and there's slavery in your background for sure. And know that in this time period that you're sitting at your Seder table, that you're acknowledging that what's happening in the universe, that you can tap into that too. It's here again now, right? So when we get to the holiday of Shavuos, which is coming up in a little bit after Memorial Day is when Shavuos is. It's 49. It's the 50th day after the second day of Passover, right? We're in that period now. We just learned that. We will celebrate Shavuos. And Shavuos is an energy of accepting the Torah. It's an energy of kind of like understanding and integrating and kind of like re-accepting and recommitting ourselves to Torah truths, to the wisdom of the universe. Like, yes, I want to know it, I want to learn it, I want to be part of it, I want to connect myself to it, and God's giving it to us, and there's a greater energy of it coming, and that we can accept that, of accepting it and taking it in and being open to it and being open-hearted to it and being one people and all of that. That's what's happening in Shavuos. So I want to fast forward to the holiday of Sukkot that we were talking about earlier, and this idea that Sukkot, where we go out into our little booths, our little houses or little whatever with constructions that we make outside. Some of us do that. We go outside of our houses and we sit in them, and we said that it represents the clouds of glory that encompassed the Jewish people as they were traveling through the desert. And what is it? It's a protection. It's God, letting God lead us. He led us through the desert. We went wherever he told us to go, and we recognized that God was protecting us, and we were safe. We could then transition from the sheep to the bull to the twins to the connection. We could work on that progression. We could actualize ourselves. Maslow's hierarchy, Maslow's triangle of hierarchy, right, where you don't have to worry about the bottom layer, which is your basic needs, like your shelter and your food. Like God's giving us food, He's giving us shelter, right? So we're learning how to actualize ourselves, learning how to get into like our soul talk. We don't have to worry about the basics. We're going up the triangle. And I wonder whether here we are in COVID times, and Rabbi Sachs brings this out in his Emor Torah this week about this Parshat Emor, where he talks about the energy of recognizing that God's taking care of us. And yes, that's Sukkot's energy, and yes, that's going outside of our house, but it's also the day, the festival, the holiday, where we are commanded, where we are given the opportunity to celebrate the holiday with joy. It's Zaman Simchatenu. It's the holiday where we are asked to be joyous. Okay, when we talk about mandating emotions, but the holiday of Sukkot is the day where the holiday is one of joy. And it's an interesting paradox, because we're out in the wild, we're out in our little huts, and we know sometimes there's squirrels and raccoons and who knows, and there's rain and there's the elements, and and you're outside and you don't know what's going to happen, and there is an aspect of fragility, of recognizing the natural world around you, which we're all doing now, and also that God's protecting us, recognizing that God's protecting us. And in that space of sort of sitting back and saying, okay, God's in charge, which we do every Shabbat, God's in charge, there should come from that perhaps an aspect of joy, an aspect of I don't need to be anxious. I don't need to worry. I'm going to let go of being in charge, of being in control. And again, I think, some of these are the conversations that we're having in our COVID days, is recognizing how little control we have, and where do we go to say, like, who's in charge, and as a believing, person, I believe God's in charge, and God is deciding, or God has the ultimate picture, the big picture, and understand why the world has to go through this, and what it is that we're going to learn from this, and how we're going to. But from our standpoints, I wonder if it doesn't remind us of the Sukkot days, where we're sitting in our sukkah saying, "You, God, are in charge." We're letting go, and in that letting go, in being faithful, in trusting that God's in charge, there's a certain joy that comes from that, and a certain, like, I can now sleep, I can now rest, I don't have to take charge, yes, we have to do everything we possibly can. I'm not saying that we just sit at home. Well, I am saying that we all sit at home, but yes, we have to do the best we can, and wash our hands, and wear our gloves, and put on face masks, and not go to the store as much, and like hunker in. There's something we have to do, and then there's other things that we have to do, but the idea of letting go and letting God take charge. Yes, we put in our efforts, and the rest is up to God. And I think that's part of the message, perhaps, of the Sukkot story, or the Sukkot idea, or the Sukkot energy, is to understand that God's running the world. And as much as I am fearful about what will happen, let go, say God's in charge. Just like He took us through the wilderness for 40 years and fed us and clothed us and did everything for us. I don't know quite how that sits with everybody, but I think that that's something to ponder and to think about, like how much we worry about things that we can't change, and to let go of that. There is a tradition on Shavuos to eat foods that are dairy, to eat milk foods. It's interesting, given 3 different reasons I learned recently why we eat milk foods on the holiday of Shavuos. So one is that breast milk changes flavor depending on what the mother eats. So if she eats different foods, then the milk comes out different. So that idea that the wisdom in the world, the wisdom that comes out through Torah, tastes different depending on who we are and what we're thinking and what's happening in our lives, and what we read and what we learn, that there's different flavors of the Torah that come out. So I thought that was a really nice analogy to think of milk Torah being like milk, that it can taste different depending on, you know, where we're at and what we're feeding ourselves with. That the Torah that we ingest, so to speak, is going to taste different. That's one. The other is that milk apparently is most, what's the word I'm looking for? The most preserved. It contained best in an earthenware vessel. In an earthenware vessel. So an earthenware vessel is like a humble. It's the lowest kind. It's not fancy metal or anything. It's like it's not gold or silver. It's like the earthenware. It's like the lowest. It's the humble. It's the down to basics. So again, the idea that when we become more like earthenware, when we are the vessels, then we're going to hold the milk and it's going to be fresher. If we're like the earthenware vessel, if we're like the matzah, if we're like the lower, like we're like more humble. So that's another idea. And then the third idea that I really like is the idea that is that milk, when you have a milk meal, you feel kind of sleepy, like it's a soporific. It kind of puts you to sleep. So the idea isn't necessarily to go to sleep, but the idea is that when you eat milk, that it makes you calm. That we give milk to, warm milk to children when they're all anxious, calms you down. There's a certain something like an aspect of it that takes the stress level down. And perhaps that's another way to understand this idea that I just gave over about the sukkah and about the clouds of glory and about letting go and letting God take charge. And when we do that, that our anxiety level goes down. That milk kind of puts us to sleep. It kind of makes us feel like, okay, everything's okay with the world. Like, I don't have to run everything. I don't have to take care of everything. I don't have to worry about everything. That I'm going to let God take over. I'm going to let God take over. And that's a huge thing to think how we do that, how we let God take over. But that's one of those ideas is that when we drink milk, we get into a calmer state of mind, and that's the mindset we want to have, where we're calm, do our work, do the best we can, the rest is up to God, and kind of take a step back and not get frantic and worry and like about things that are outside of our control. Okay, so let me just go over a couple of things. So this week's Torah portion, Emor, talks about the Kohen and how the Kohen, the priest, so Moses had to teach the Kohen and his children, the sons of Aaron. So this idea of teaching everybody, teaching the next generation, keeping the Masorah, keeping the tradition going. Important to do that, and to do it with Emor, do it with a love language, with embrace and with kindness, and not with a harshness and with a directive, but more calm and kind and loving. And then the idea of the Kohen and how his job is to connect heaven and earth, to do the work and to bring the sacrifices in the temple that bring heaven and earth together, blessing the people, bringing godliness down to the world, blessing the people. And that through his words, he's blessing the people. And in order to do that, he has to hold himself separate. He has to be separate from things that are disconnected. He has to be separate from death, which is a disconnection of the soul from the body, the soul, the heavenly aspect, the divine aspect from the physical body aspect. That death is a separation of those two, and the Kohen is about connecting the two. So he can't be around the tameh, the void, the spiritual energy that comes from death. He can't be around that because it's antithetical to his job of connecting the two. Same with divorce. He cannot marry a divorced woman, because the divorced woman has been in a relationship that has exploded, so to speak, and in that relationship there's a loss of the divine that was there, gluing it together, not gluing it together, that was part of that relationship, that the divinity, that the divine aspects of a healthy, good, loving marriage had gone. And so in that's again a separation, a void, a disconnect from something that's about connection. So you can't marry, and again this idea about being that the Kohen is the Kohen cannot function as a Kohen if he has a blemish. He can't bring a sacrifice that's a blemish. And the whole idea of separation, how things are separate in our world, that we have separate things. We have night and day. We have the Kohen who's different from the rest of the Jewish people. We have the Jewish people that are separate and different than the rest of the world. We have holy days, and we have Shabbat that are different than the weekdays. We have a lot of distinctions and differentiations, boundaries that distinguish things from each other. So yes, about unity, but also diversity, and we want to be one, but we also recognize that there's diversity in that oneness. Okay, and then we talked about the holidays. We talked about different holidays. Specifically, we talked about the energy that exists in a holiday, that are moedim, that these holidays are times for us to have a meeting with God, to rendezvous with God, so to speak. The idea of 7 days is 6 days of the week, of the work week, and then 7th day is a separate day, it's a Shabbat, and then going into the 8th day, which is supernatural. It takes us beyond the normal, beyond the natural, into the next realm, which is why a baby boy had a breach. We talked about this before. On an 8th day, we've gone through the 6 weeks, 6 days of the week, work days. We've gone through that special Shabbat day, which is nature and God combined. And now we go into the supernatural, above nature, onto the 8th day. And that's when the baby has his brit. And also when we count the Omer, we talked about counting these days between Passover and Shavuos. We're counting 49 days. It's 7 times 7 times 7 times 7. We go 7 sevens, 49. And then we go 50 into the 50. We go up into the 8th. We go into the supernatural, into Shavuos, or accepting the Torah. We talk where we're able to accept the Torah, where we've changed, we've worked on ourselves, we've gone step by step, day in, day out. We're working on ourselves, we're changing ourselves, we're moving towards a goal of birthing ourselves, of being the kinds of people that we want to be, and surrounding ourselves with the people that we want to surround, and focusing on different character traits that we have, and working on them, and trying to improve them, and always moving, always moving. So we have all these festivals built in as moedim, as days where we have a rendezvous with God, we have a date with God, and amazing. It's amazing that's built into the universe. And to talk about time, how time is this ascending spiral. It's not circular. We don't come back to the exact place we were before. We've hopefully gone up a notch. Yes, it's linear time, and we're going through time, but we're also coming around to that same energy that exists at this time of year. And we talked about that vis-a-vis Passover, why Passover is a springtime holiday. It's spring, the energy that exists. It is why Passover is in the spring, because that energy exists there. It's an energy of breaking out, an energy of breaking, and same with Shavuos, and same with Rosh Hashanah, and same with Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is a day of forgiveness. That's when the greater concentration of forgiveness is available to be had. That's on Yom Kippur. It has to be on that day. It can't be on a different day. We can't celebrate Passover on the wrong day. It has to be on that day, because that's when you're hitting the acupuncture point, when that energy of Passover, of redemption, is most concentrated, is on the first night of Passover. So yes, you can celebrate the Seder on another night, but you're not tapping into that energy that's there to be had. And we're enjoying, don't just reminisce, but also harness that energy for you today, and make it work for you today, and use it like we're being given a gift. Okay, so the last thing I want to talk about is the end of this week's Torah portion. We learn about a man who is the child of a woman who is an Israelite. She is from the tribe of Dan. We learn about this child who came from this woman, and the father of this child is an Egyptian. And if you remember back in our Exodus story of Moses, when Moses comes out of Pharaoh's palace and he sees the Egyptian beating the Israelite, and he kills the Egyptian, if you remember that. And then the Jews say to him, are you going to kill us like you killed the Egyptian? And he gets really worried and he runs away. That's the beginning of Moses going to Midian and and the beginning of the whole burning bush, and etc., etc. But that's what happens at the beginning. With the Egyptian that Moses kills is this man's father. All right. And because in those days, the way in which, and still today, goes like the tribe that you belong to goes by the father, right? So the Kohen is descended. Anybody who's a Kohen goes through the father's line from Aaron the high priest back in our Torah, right? Moses' brother is Aaron, and anybody who is descended from Aaron through the father is a Kohen. So when the Jewish people were encamped around the Mishkan, around the tabernacle, they were camped in tribes. And each tribe was one of the sons of Jacob. So the woman who is the mother of our blasphemer in our story, the mother is from the tribe of Dan. So the blasphemer is upset because he doesn't have a Jewish father. He doesn't have a father that gives him a place to have a camp. He wants to pitch his tent. He wants to be part of the tribe where his mother lives, of the tribe of Dan. And they say, no, you can't come here. You don't belong here. You have to go by your father. But his father was an Egyptian. So he goes to a court. He goes to Moses and he says, what shall I do? And Moses says, you can't pitch in the tribe of Dan. You can't pitch there. You can't go there. And he's so angry. He's so angry that he blasphemes and he curses. And this is one of the only stories in the whole book of Leviticus is this story of what happens to this man. And the result of him doing this is that he's given the death penalty for breaking down the social fabric. But I think there's a couple of things to think about vis-a-vis this blasphemer. Number one, when we talked in the beginning about the Kohen who is able to use his words to bless and use his words to bring positivity and beautiful things into the world, that's one way of using our language. And now we have the opposite. At the end of this week's Torah portion, we have this blasphemer who's using his words for the opposite. He's breaking it down, right? He's angry. So he's using his anger and taking it out. And maybe he knows there's God, maybe he doesn't know there's God, maybe he's so angry at God he doesn't care. But he's saying things that the people can't. The people can't be exposed to. It's too offensive and wrong, right? And you shouldn't be doing that. And you gotta go. So what's interesting about this, another idea of this is that he didn't accept the answer. He didn't accept that the answer was you can't live here amongst us. I'm not sure where he's supposed to go, but he didn't accept that the answer is that you can't be here. And it's really hard to get into that mindset of accepting. If you go back to the idea we talked about the Kohen who has a blemish, he can't serve in the temple. The Kohen with a blemish can't serve in the temple. Also, this descendant from the Egyptian man and Israelite woman doesn't have a place in the camp of Dan, but he doesn't accept it. So we have this idea of what we accept and what we don't accept. And I'm not giving any direction. I'm just pointing out that in this case where this particular man did what he did, the consequence of doing that is the death penalty, and he was like put outside the pale. You can't live amongst us. That his choice of whether to accept the decision that Moses' court gave him when he took it to court and his case was heard and the answer was you can't pitch it here, he didn't accept that. And so he then lashed out and he did what he did. He didn't accept it. Whereas we don't hear about any Kohen who didn't accept that if I have a blemish, I can't serve in the temple. So I'm not quite sure how that plays into our lives today, but it's something to think about. And I think it's also something to think about the people who don't fit into our bell curve. We have a bell curve of like who's in and who's out. Like there are people, it says in our Torah over and over and over and over again, it says to take care of the widow and take care of the orphan and take care of the stranger in your midst, to take care of those people. And one of the reasons given as to why it says that over and over and over again is because those are the people on the outline. Those are the people that sort of don't kind of quote fit in. They're the people that we have to take care of because they're not part of the bell curve. The bell curve is in our society, I think, is the households with mom, dad, and children. But what about the single people? What about the gay people? What about the people who don't get married, or the people who are widowed, or the people who can't have children, or there's a lot of people that don't fit into that bell curve, and it's up to us to really bring those people in and to make sure that they feel, and not just that we're taking care of them, but that they are part of us, that we're part of them, that we're all part of a whole, that they shouldn't get to the point where they're going to turn around and curse, or they're going to turn around and say, there's no God, or whatever the people will say. It's up to us to really kind of take those people and hold them and love them, and that's important for us to do. So I know we're probably getting a little bit over, and I'm sorry that this shir is split into two pieces, but I want to go back over some of the things, and really the thing I want to say is that we all have a place in this world. We all have a place in this world, and we all have a job to do, to work on ourselves, to birth ourselves, to get to the place where we fit into the puzzle of life. So we fit in so that we're not separate. yes, we're different, and yes, we have different parts of us and different energies and different gifts that God gives us to put that into the world, and that if we can build that up, that's a really good thing. So just to recap, the idea of the Kohen and the way he uses language, the way the blasphemer and he uses language, direct opposites. The way in which we delineate the Kohen as being different from the rest of the Jewish people, and the way that the Kohen who's blemished is different than the rest of the Kohanim, and we accept that. There's a joke. I'm going to end on a joke now. There's a joke about this fellow who really wants to be a Kohen, and he goes to the rabbi and he said, "Can you make me a Kohen?" And the Kohen says, "No, I can't make you a Kohen." He says, "I'll give you, $10,000. And he keeps offering him more and more money. He says, "I can't make you a Kohen, but I have a really interesting question for you. Like, why do you want to be a Kohen so much?" And he says, "I want to be a Kohen because my father was a Kohen and his father was a Kohen." So, we understand that the Kohen goes through the father. So if your father is a Kohen and you continue to in that line, you are the Kohen because your father's Kohen. You can't become a Kohen. Either you are or you're not. But if you are, then you have a special role to play. And that role means that you can't come into contact with the dead. It means that you can't marry a divorced woman, and so on and so on. And we spoke about what that one of the Kabbalistic understandings of why that is, that the Kohen can't come close to death and he can't come close to a divorced woman. So go back and listen to the beginning of the shir if you want to hear that, because I think it's really interesting. But anyway, so that the Kohen is one who uses his language to love and to bring peace and to bring blessing into the world. And then we talked about the holidays, and we talked about the ways in which the energy of the holiday is why the holiday is then. The energy of forgiveness is when Yom Kippur is, because Yom Kippur has to happen on the day when there's most energy of forgiveness in the world. And if we in our day want to tap into it, we can't say, "Oh, it happened long ago, it has nothing to do with us." It has everything to do with us, because the way in which we live our lives and how we tap into it's a gift. Here's the energy of forgiveness. Tap into it, because you can ride that wave. You can ride the wave of redemption from things that hold you back when you're in the month of Nisan. You can be this energy of faithfulness in the moment of living outside in your sukkah, in the holiday of Sukkot, where we have faith that God's going to take care of us and going to lead us where we need to go. And I think that's a message for today too. Rabbi Sachs says, faith is living with uncertainty. Faith is living with uncertainty. And aren't we in uncertain times now? And how much faith we have to say, God's running this ship. I'm going to do my best. I'm going to do my bit. But at the end of the day, it's not up to me. And that we have this ascending spiral, the idea that we can create ourselves, the idea that we count the Omer, we go from the second day of Passover all the way to Shavuos, and the Omer is this animal food that we're offering, that we're getting rid of the animal side, we're channeling the animal side into a more spiritual side, working on ourselves, building ourselves up. And what do the holidays do? The holidays define us. That Passover is this holiday where we know who we are as a people. We break out from things that hold us back. Shavuos, we're learning the moral code, the lessons, we're accepting that. Rosh Hashanah, we understand the brevity of life and the ability to know God is created the world, runs the world. Yom Kippur is this forgiving, mending time, a time for us to look at our faults and to try to work on those. Sukkot is this journey through life analogy of living temporarily and living with joy in the fact that we are traversing the desert of life with God around us, sustaining us and holding us and protecting us, and that we can have some level of joy in that and level of acceptance and level of stress-free and worry-free. Experience the energy in the present. That's what the holidays, these days, these Moedim, these days where we have a rendezvous with God, are telling us now is this inherent energy in time where we can experience that energy now. Let's manage time well. Let's recognize that time is a spiral, and that there are sacred moments where we can acknowledge that energy and use it to change ourselves, to mend ourselves, to redefine ourselves, and to take ourselves along, to move ourselves along with joy. And so I wish you all a good week.